Okay, so first we're going to talk about just a little overview of, why run a hackathon. And personally, I think there are really two main reasons why you might run a hackathon. One is you're trying to bring people together in more of a training type of a scenario. And the other reason is that you want them to get together in order to do some work. So generally, in terms of a hackathon, there is some type of a theme.
Yep, absolutely. And so the theme isn't always something like, and we'll share with you some of those things, but sometimes the theme might be as broad as, hey, we want to do something with Cloud Foundry. And so we'll give you some very anecdotal, very concrete examples of those things as we move through some of the next following slides.
Yeah, I think the key, though, is that, it's really structured like a competition. It's a friendly competition, although there may be some trash talking going on, right? That is very true. So there is some competition element to it, and there's always like some judging and some prizes. So the idea is you come together and you try to make it a really fun event and really make the most of the entire, hackathon. Okay, so why don't we go into a couple of examples of hackathons that we've been involved with. And what I'm going to do is, first I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the types of hackathons that we're doing at Intel. And then I'll turn it over to Cornelia to talk about some of the things that she's been working with the Pivotal community on. So first of all, Intel has this program that's called Code-For-Good. And if you go on the Intel.com website, you can see this, lots of examples of different types of hackathons and events around coding in general, actually, not just hackathons. And there's a lot of great information there on what's happening in different areas. A lot of it has to do with engaging with students and having them really, again, it's kind of more on the learning side of things, having them learn about new tools and innovation, and introduce them more from an academic setting into, more of a real world type of a scenario. So they generally, the Code-For-Good team runs, 1- and 2-day hackathons. And they've had just really great results. Not only does it engage with the student community, but also it tends to be a theme that has to do with some type of social responsibility. So, so again, kind of combining those different purposes together. And in fact, Cornelia and I actually participated in a Code-For-Good hackathon at the Intel Developer Forum last year.
Yeah, and it was quite cool. The theme there, I don't know if it was something that you chose or somebody in the program chose.
Oh, I'm guilty.
So Kathy's guilty. So the theme there was really fantastic. It was about teaching math skills to junior high students. And so the individuals that were coding there were actually mostly students from a junior college here in the local area from La Cuesta College? Contra Costa College or something like that. I'm not from the local Bay Area, so I apologize if I've butchered your alma mater's name, but
it's a tongue twister.
It's a tongue twister. So that experience was really great, and that was done actually on the IDF show floor.
Right.
So the students were, and one of the things that I thought was really cool was that Intel had rolled out some of their own new hardware at the show and had Cloud Foundry deployed on that behind the walls on the show floor booth. So the students were sitting out in the beanbag chairs, and people were milling around going, what are these kids doing here? And they're in the beanbag chairs, and they're all coding. And the server was right behind one of those temporary walls, and Cloud Foundry was running on that.
Yeah,
so
don't you just love that new server smell?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, right, yep. So, and actually, they loved Cornelia so much, they invited her to Georgia Tech to do another hackathon with some students at Georgia Tech, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, the Georgia Tech experience I want to share with you, the theme there was battling childhood obesity. So some of the teams that engaged in things, they did all sorts of different things, but one of the teams did kind of a geocaching type of a thing, where using a mobile phone, they would be given points where they needed to go to a particular point to pick up a clue for the next point and so on. And one of the cool things was that we actually got outside. I think it was in February, but we had a fairly warm day in Georgia. And we got to run around, and we have some video of the teams actually sprinting around the campus. And it really, really is a very fun environment, a really fun way of getting people hands-on, not just a dry thing. So hopefully it's not too dry tonight. But
Right. Okay, so, so that's an example of doing something where, you're kind of training the next generation, and, people are building new skills, and you're doing something that's also got that social responsibility aspect to it. But, next I'm going to talk about a different type of hackathon that my team has been sponsoring in Intel IT in order to replace instructor-led training. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get people to write applications that run well in a cloud. And it doesn't actually matter if you're writing for platform as a service or infrastructure as a service. How you structure your application, a lot of those principles are the same. And so we wanted to teach them about those principles. So we sponsored a series of hackathons. We did about 8 of them, trained over 100 developers. We did it globally. And it was highly successful. But I have to tell you that I had an ulterior motive. My evil plan was to introduce them to Cloud Foundry, platform as a service, the concept around platform as a service. And so not only did we train them on Cloud-Aware apps, but they had to deploy their apps on Cloud Foundry using platform as a service. And it actually served as really some demand generation for us in IT. Of showing them how to use, these modern techniques and tools like Cloud Foundry. So you can see here there were, like I said, we had 8 of them globally. We trained over 100 developers. You can see the structure of it where, we made sure that we fed everybody, and we did have fun tools, and we had a team that was available that wandered around. I called them the roadside assistance team, and they walked around and they helped people actually get their applications deployed, and were there to answer any coding questions. So that's an example of an enterprise, and it was a one-day format, just a one-day hackathon.
super, and so I wanted to share a couple of other experiences with you, kind of more along the enterprise front, like Kathy was just talking about on the previous slide. So I wanted to share with you that within the Cloud Foundry team itself, at Pivotal, we do hackathons as well. So they're really less about education or less about getting some work done, and we're not doing anything like we're doing with the Intel Hack for Good. But it's really much more of a, hey, let's just let off some steam. We've been working really hard, and we just want to have a little bit of fun. So it's really more around morale building, creativity, inspiration, and so on. That's not to say that you don't get something valuable, some value beyond those things. Those things are value in and of themselves. But it's not to say that you don't end up with code that might even make it back into the code base at some point. But that isn't the goal. Now, the formats of those things are, and I hate to tell you this, but sometimes we take a day off. So if you're watching the news groups and all of a sudden you see a day where things are kind of down low and there's not a lot of issues, pull requests being done, it might be a hack day for us. And so we take the whole day off. There's nothing else that's done. People work outside of the repositories. So you're not working off of your code branches. We encourage people to take, if they want to fork a repository and work on something, that's fine. But there isn't any work done directly on the master branches, because that's really not the point. We step away from the backlogs for the day. It's a one-day event, and people are encouraged to either form groups or work individually. The big kicker, and we talked about prizes. Now, there's no particular, you get to take home an iPad or anything like that at the end of the day, but we all know that geeks get a certain amount of pleasure out of just showing what they've done. So there's a little bit of that pride factor of, at the end of the day, everybody has a chance to show what they did over the course of the day, and everybody gets to earn some bragging rights on that. So we do those. We've done a couple of them over the course of the last, I don't know, maybe 6 months or so. And that's something that we've had some really positive results on, and we'll continue to move forward.
Well, you know, the bragging is really important, Cornelia.
Yeah.
But, you know, so Intel's a big company, and we actually have a formal recognition system where we can recognize people. So we actually utilize that. But I did something interesting at the beginning when we started doing some of the hackathons. I negotiated a deal with, the team negotiated a deal with the manager that was responsible for PC client services. And what we did was the winner of the hackathon got to go to the top of the PC refresh list, and they got the latest and greatest Ultrabook.
Ah, wow, that's very cool.
Very cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So the other example that's on this particular slide, it comes from our customer base. So you heard Monsanto talking this morning, and they've done a couple of hackathons themselves. Now they had a slightly different focus. So they have a backlog of things that they want to get to that they somehow never get the chance to. So what they did with their 2 different hackathons that they've run so far is they've looked at that backlog. It's not the backlog of stuff that we need to keep the lights on and keep the boat afloat. It's a backlog of things that they want to innovate on, and they somehow never had the chance. So they set aside a day and said that this day is going to be the day where we're going to work on those innovative projects. Now, they didn't choose those. They actually took a little bit of time ahead to choose those topics. So they did a formal call for papers where people within the organization, within the company, could present their ideas for those things that they wanted to do innovation on. And then there was a selection process for those handful of projects that they're going to work on during the Hackfest, during the hackathon. Now, in particular, it spanned a broad range of things. Cloud Foundry was only one of the things that they did. But they used that, for example, they chose some of those things in the call for papers to specifically work on their Cloud Foundry strategy. So they chose things like, oh, we need a service broker in a particular area. So we're going to encourage people to do a hackathon on building a service broker for a specific piece of technology. Or they, for example, built a Bosch release. They really wanted to get some experience with building a brand new Bosch release, so that was one of the topics that they selected from the call for papers. So it's a slightly different theme, but really nets some very, very pragmatic results for them as well, and very, very positive, very fun environment, and they taught people along the way, kind of along the lines of what you were saying.
Right? Mm-hmm.
So. And then I just wanted to share with you, earlier if you saw the Ignite talks, Wei Min spoke from Mopaz. They did a very interesting hackathon that didn't span a single day. It was actually a 5 or 6 week long process. They engaged with an open source developer community in China, and they received hundreds of different teams that built applications. Now, they did offer cash and prizes, so there were people that were very motivated to do that. And they had a number of, I think 350 or so submissions to that. They did some voting in the public, which voted them down to the top 100. And then they had 8 experts that took that top 100 based on the popular vote and selected those down to finalists and then selected the final winners. There were some cool prizes like electronic devices and so on. And so there's a couple of screenshots from those. And I've pulled those screenshots and these results from a paper that Wei Min shared with us with her permission, of course. And we're working on a blog post, so we'll get some of the details of these. But there's some interesting charts in here. You can see that one of the things that I won't go over the details here, the slides will be available. You can look at the details on what build packs people chose, what services they chose. There's some interesting data in there. But the thing that's, I think, most interesting that you need to think about here is they gathered this data. So at the end of the hackathon, they had a very explicit thing that they wanted to accomplish, which was a survey. And they had constructed a survey where they asked those questions. What background are you coming from? Are you a student? Are you an industry? Are you a hobbyist? And so on. What build packs did you use? What languages did you program in? What services did you consume? And these are some of the results that they gathered on that. So very, very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. So there's just all different kinds of hackathons that you can sponsor, just a whole range of things. You know, and I guess, you know, using Cloud Foundry is really a great tool for for doing these hackathons, don't you think, Cornelia?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so this is a similar slide that you've seen earlier, I think that James Waters presented this morning. And for those of you who are familiar with Cloud Foundry, this is going to ring very familiar to you. Really, these are some of the main pillars that we consider strengths in Cloud Foundry, and you can see how they shine in hackathons. So the ones that are highlighted here in yellow with the yellow box around it, easy to get started. So the last thing that you want to do if you have a one-day hackathon is spend that entire day standing up your development environment, standing up the infrastructure, downloading the right version of TC server or whatever your application container is, installing the right language runtime, dealing with dependency hell, all of that stuff. That's the last thing you want to do. You want people to hit the ground running. And if you saw earlier when I talked about, yeah, PaaS is all for the developer, well, and I said it's not all for the developer. I'll get back to that theme in just a moment. It is great for the developer. When I say it's not just for the developer, I don't mean it isn't great for the developer. It is. It's fantastic for the developer. And so Cloud Foundry is a great way to get started. You've got the platform immediately. Then you've got the set of services as well. So you've got the application running environment, but then you have the set of services that you can leverage on top of that. So actually, anecdotally, one of the things, the first time that I showed up at the IDF forum, when Kathy invited me to participate in that first hackathon, I thought, wow, this is going to be really cool. I'm going to be walking around. I'm going to be helping people, and teaching is what I love to do. And I got there, and I chatted with Kathy, gave me an opportunity to chat with the students. She had done some training with them ahead of time on the platform itself, and I said, hey, I'm here from Pivotal. I'm here for you. If you have any problems with the Cloud Foundry, and when I was at Georgia Tech, I did a similar thing, did a 45-minute presentation, said, if you have any trouble, I'm over here in the corner, let me know.
Roadside assistance.
Roadside assistance. Mm-hmm. You know what I did? I sat there and I fiddled. I worked on my Spring Trader application. Nobody ever came to me for anything.
Oh, yeah. You got to get out. You got to get out there and mingle.
Yep. So it is. It's really great for spinning up. But you can see now that I've actually expanded it. So I cannot not mention that when you're done with that application, with that proof of concept, being able to operate it then without having to throw it over the wall and go through some major rework just to be able to deploy this into production, that's really where that box expands to the right. And now you have the ability to operate it as well.
Right. Okay, so why don't we shift gears a little bit now that we've talked about Cloud Foundry for hackathons, and just to touch on briefly, acknowledging the fact that you do want people to use good cloud-aware application programming techniques. And we have a lot of information that's available on that. I'm not going to go through this list, but just, because we're running out of time, actually. But there are a number of things that, as they're doing work on the cloud and deploying applications there, if you're going to use a tool like Cloud Foundry, you want to make sure that you're also promoting these techniques as well.
Right, and I want to interject here that actually Kathy's being a bit too modest here. She's written a couple of really fantastic white papers that, quite frankly, we point our customers to all the time about building applications, architecting applications for the cloud. So I encourage you to Google Kathy Spence and Intel, and you will find those white papers, and they're very, very helpful.
Thank you, Cornelia. Thank you.
Not planned, but.
Okay, so why don't we just spend some time too talking a little bit about best practices for the cloud, and we've got a couple of slides here. One on how you organize the event, one on how do you run Cloud Foundry to support the event, and then another one that is more on when you're actually running the event itself. So we'll start with this first one around what do you need to do in terms of organizing the event. And again, since we don't have a lot of time today and these slides will be available, we're just going to hit a few of these highlights around really thinking through what's your location for your hackathon, and do you have the right facilities in place to actually run the event. One of the things that I really like here to provide the 4 basic ingredients: food, power, internet, and caffeine, and not necessarily in that order. Right, so again, kind of thinking through that, when you're working with a group of developers, that they love to be fed. It's funny too, they just love pizza. I don't know, I've asked, even in Asia, I asked them, what do you want to have to eat? They told me pizza. So it's just, really, catering to that audience, making it fun for them. Is there anything that jumps out to you here, Cornelia?
No, the one thing that I would say is that you absolutely have to think these things through ahead of time, but don't feel like you're constrained to, oh, I need rooms with chairs, or it doesn't need to be a traditional environment.
You do need some chairs, though.
Well, actually you do. And it's funny you should say that, because we didn't have a lot of chairs on the IDF floor, and then we had to pull tables over. Yeah, so we did have to do that. So you do have to think about some of those pragmatics, but really the IDF is the case in point, is don't feel like you have to have a classroom setting, for example. So going back to that example, it was on the show floor. It was really quite cool, because people were walking around and going, gee, what's going on over there?
Well, a few people sat down and they didn't know they were in the middle of the hackathon, but that's a whole other story.
Yep. So don't over-engineer it. Make it fun. It doesn't have to be a classroom setting.
Right. The other thing I just want to point out on this one before we flip over to the next is this grading criteria and setting the rules, so that when people come into the hackathon, that they know how they're competing against other people. And one of the techniques that we use is we actually create a rubric that we hand out. So we really understand, like, have a point structure, have a rubric. We hand it out in advance. And the way that we've been running those hackathons is that we have each team actually pre-grade themselves, and then when we come around and do the judging, we start with their grade and then we tweak it from there. And it saves a lot of time, and believe me, not everybody gives themselves 10. Sometimes we're our own worst critics, but it's really been very, very successful for the grading part of it.
Yep.
Okay, so why don't we talk about Cloud Foundry?
Sure. And so the first thing that you need to worry about, of course, is having Cloud Foundry availability. So oftentimes, so at Georgia Tech, for example, we used run.pivotal.io. So we used the public web service that was available. At the IDF show floor, I already mentioned that there was a brand new Intel hardware that was running that. And Kathy brought along some of her incredible staff to support that. And so those are a couple of options. Now, there's another option, which I point out on there as well, is sometimes your goal of the hack night or the hackathon, and tonight one of the topics you might be interested in is, hey, I want to get this thing running on my laptop. So it might be that that is the goal, is to get Cloud Foundry running locally on a local machine. So Bosch Lite might be exactly what you need. And I have done some workshops with clients where the first thing that we do is Bosch Lite, and then we start building Bosch releases, for example. So that's an option as well. Now, you do want to make sure that you have sufficient capacity. The nice thing is that that's easy to adjust. So I remember when we were at the IDF show floor, and some students, we had student teams, and they had these sample accounts that were originally set up, and they started saying, oh, we'll have to delete a few apps. And I didn't want, we had large teams. The teams were about a dozen students per team. And they were kind of competing for resources. And so I walked over to one of your colleagues and I said, hey, we're having some quota problems. And he came back in about 10 minutes and said, okay, we're all set.
Well, that's the value of the cloud right there.
Yep, exactly, exactly.
All right, so let's talk about, so you've organized your event, you got Cloud Foundry all set up, now you're actually ready to run the event. So what are some good tips here? Right? So really, try to make it as fun as possible, right? And especially if you're in an enterprise setting, you want to make sure that they really have time to actually participate and they're not being pulled away by other commitments, right? Also, we found that it's really helpful to start with some type of an overview presentation, get people all on the same page, but you want to keep it super short because you want them to spend as much time coding as possible. But normally for our Cloud-Aware hackathons, what we do is we do an overview of what does it mean to be Cloud-Aware, and then they spend the whole day working on those applications, for example.
Yep. One of the other things that I'll highlight off of the slide here is to consider periodic readouts. So we are all guilty, all technologists are guilty of saying, I can figure this out, I can do this, I'm all right. And so particularly in some of the settings where we were working with students, they're afraid sometimes to admit that they don't know how to do something, to admit that they're stuck.
Oh, they never do that.
But even in an industry setting, especially if one of your goals is for education, is don't allow people to get stuck and not make the most use of their time. So at Georgia Tech, for example, I was working with Matthew Wolf, a professor there, and that was a tip really that I picked up from him. Was I tended to trust that they were okay and doing on their own. Like I said, I was pretty bored that they weren't calling on me. But he really made the point of every hour and a half, and we did a 24-hour thing where we stayed up all night. I say we, the royal we, I went and slept for 4 hours. Too old for that. And, but he, every hour and a half, he would say, okay, pencils down, well, metaphorically speaking, pencils down, everybody look up, stand up, let's walk over here and let's do a check-in. What's your progress report? What have you done so far? And that is really where we teased out sometimes that they were headed down a wrong path. Maybe they were starting to build a monolith. Maybe they were starting to hard code something and weren't following those cloud-aware practices.
Right. The show and tell thing is really important. And at the end, you want people to be proud of what they're doing. You want to, you want them to build the community and get to know one another too. So by them getting up and sharing, periodically, and also at the end, it provides that opportunity to do that.
Yep. Okay,
so those are some best practices for running the event. And I guess the other thing too is, at the end, of that hackathon that we worked on together, I thought that was really cool. We did our own little award ceremony that was there, and we didn't do big prizes. We gave the students some Target gift cards because they stayed on target. Get it? And we handed out Hershey's Kisses to everyone because after all that hard work, we thought everyone needed a kiss. And we did like a lot of really fun, silly things that don't cost a lot of money, but really amp up the fun factor.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so that was fun. All right, so here we are. Look at this, like we're right on time.
Right on time.
That's awesome.
Yep, perfect.
Right, so just, to sum things up, hackathons really are very popular right now. They're totally hot. You can't go, anywhere without talking about hackathons. You can host them yourself, but you do need to think through some of these details that we talked about today, right? And Cloud Foundry has been very successful, in all of the hackathons that we have delivered. So, I don't know, do you want to say anything else, Cornelia?
Yep, I think that about sums it up. You can certainly reach out to people who have experience, Kathy, myself, and various other people, if you want to chat about hackathons, and we're more than happy to support you in any way that we can.
We love hackathons.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. All right. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.